Welcome back to Propology 101, where we break down all your favorite props, or a lot of your favorite props from all your favorite sci-fi. So far, we're going to be continuing along with Star Wars, and we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, DL-44s. And I think the best place to start is the Han Solo hero from A New Hope. Now, Han had two different blasters for reasons we'll get into later on, but what we're going to be talking about is the hero. Now, this is the blaster everybody thinks of when they think of Han Solo. This is the blaster they reproduced for the Solo movie. This is Han Solo's blaster. So this is based on a C-96 Mauser. Now, this is kind of a special C-96 Mauser. It's referred to as the bullnose Mauser. And the reason why it's referred to as the bullnose Mauser, has been modified to have a little bit fatter barrel than a standard Mauser. Now, there is a reason for this. There was a movie made in 1967 called Naked Runner. It's a Frank Sinatra movie. In the movie, he had to use a modified C-96 Mauser as a sniper rifle. The pistol and all the pieces to turn it into a sniper rifle were carried around in a briefcase. They used a standard Mauser buttstock, but he put on a rifle barrel. When they started production for Star Wars, they went into Bapti and says, "What do you got?" And they mocked up a bunch of stuff, and the bullnose Mauser came out again and was turned into the Han Solo DL-44. Now, we don't know how many bullnose Mausers were made for the Naked Runner production. Kind of doubt they made any bullnose Mausers for the Star Wars production, but there is one Mauser that we have been able to track and confirm it was used on Star Wars, and that particular Mauser had a 5-digit serial number. And when they machined down this part of the Mauser, you lost the first digit of the serial number, but the remainder digits were 2813. Now, if you had the first digit, we could actually date that Mauser to a particular time period or whatever. But using clues on the design, the hammer design, and a few other details, this was basically a pre-World War I. So it could be a pre-World War I, 1910, all the way up to World War I. They didn't change much during that time period. Moving on from the Mauser, we get down to the scope and the scope mount. Now, the scope and the scope mount are also movie stars. They showed up in a movie called Sitting Prey in 1972. Basically, it's this scope and this scope mount here. This scope was screen matched from Sitting Target to Star Wars, and actually production photos of the blaster before it went into filming. So we know this scope is the exact same scope from the 1972 movie. The scope mount is also matched to the movie, but we don't know the source of the scope mount. One possible, and this is my own personal theory, that this very much looks like a Mauser Nagant style scope mount. My theory possibly is that someone along the line, some manufacturer, came up with a Mauser Nagant style scope mount, a scope mount that maybe could incorporate their own scope or assortment of scopes. But there's no evidence to this, and no one's really been able to find and narrow this scope down. But that's kind of my theory, maybe a limited run or whatever. The scope was mounted in 1972 in Sitting Target. The scope was mounted on the left side of the Mauser, and it used a dovetail style mounting, meaning the male side of the dovetail joint was mounted to the gun, and the scope side had the female dovetail, so they would slide together, and it was held together by the exact same hold down thumb screw that you see on the Han Solo DL-44. When it was being used for the DL-44, the scope was moved to the right side, and the dovetail was mounted to a mounting bar. That mounting bar was mounted to the Mauser, probably using studs and these little thumb screws right here. I had read an article somewhere, and I don't know if it was someone on the production crew or someone from Bapti, but they talked about during Star Wars A New Hope and this particular blaster that they were removing the scope mount, or removing the scope and moving it to a different blaster all the time. My thought was maybe they may only have had just the actual scope, and they were moving it from the blank firing version to a holster stuffer because this big scope is obvious if it's not there. I found evidence of the scope being removed using the dovetail, loosening it, sliding it forward, and removing it, and then putting it back on, sliding it back, and tightening down. I found evidence of that actually on some production photos of the actual screen-used DL-44. So that's kind of a cool note that maybe that dovetail design was used on moving the scope from one blaster to another. And they probably only had one of these scope mounts also. Moving down to the flash suppressor. The flash suppressor is from a pre-World War II German machine gun, an MG-81. As far as greeblies go, we have this front grill on the front of the magwell here. Now, this grill piece was an unknown part for a very long time, and just only within the last 10 years, it was finally identified. This piece comes from a remote-controlled airplane kit of a Hawker, a British Hawker. And basically what this is a radial engine jug. This is half of a radial engine jug. Now, there's some other pieces from this model kit that do show up as a greebly on the DL-44, but they didn't last for filming. And I think the first time they were holstered, those greeblies were pulled off and possibly even stayed in the bottom of the holster for the rest of production. And what it was a T-rail, basically the same thing they used for the details on the side of the E11. It was a T-rail cut down, attached to the top of the barrel with two of the push rods from this radial engine kit sitting on each side of it. That same detail is also seen on another blaster from A New Hope. Also, the last greebly is this disc right here. I have seen photos where this actually doesn't look like a disc, and I've seen other photos that it does look like a disc. And there was a theory at one time that this disc actually was a machine point for settling the scope mount on the left side for the naked prey version. That scope mount fitted on the left side, and it may have been an area where they leveled it so it would stay in line. That's just a thought. There's not much evidence of that actually. It could have been just a disc and the lighting is a little bit different, but there is a little aluminum disc right here, and that part is probably just custom made to add more detail to the blaster. Thank you for following along with us while we broke down this very, very iconic blaster. I mean, this blaster is what everyone thinks of when they think of Han Solo. Join us next time when we break down that other DL-44 solo blaster from A New Hope.